Fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudice, and partial affections, the result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of the island, the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estate within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This Honourable House now resumes its sitting.
Mrs. Holness, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Samuda, Miss Grange, Mr. Holness, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malahoo Fort, Dr. Tufton, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Charles, Mr. Green, Mr. Terry Long, Miss Smith, Mr. Main, Dr. Dunn, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Davis, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Clark, Mr. Cousins, Miss Crawford, Miss Daly, Miss Davis, Mr. Golding, Mr. Graham, Dr. Guy, Miss Hamilton, Miss Hannah, Mr. Henry Kitts, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Jackson, okay. Mr. Lawrence, Miss Lee, Mr. Miller, Miss Morrison, Mrs. Nita Garvey, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Sibbles, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Witter, Mr. Wright.
Statements by ministers.
Madam Speaker, there will be 3 statements by ministers this afternoon. The first will be by the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, Prime Minister, followed by Honourable Favour Williams, Minister of Education, Youth and Information, and then followed by the Honourable Floyd Green, Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, it's Madam Speaker, it has been, thank members, it has just been, it's on COVID. I don't generally present the COVID statements, but we do have copies. I'll send them. Madam Speaker, it has been just over 4 weeks since I announced the recrafting of our measures in Parliament on June 22nd, 2021, to take effect as of the 1st of July 2021. The purpose of my statement today is to provide an update on what we are seeing so far 3 weeks after the measurements came into effect. Based on the latest report from this morning, Jamaica recorded 122 new cases of COVID-19 yesterday. Our cumulative cases of COVID-19 are now at 51,404. Sadly, 1,163 persons have died. I offer condolences to all those who have lost family, friends and loved ones and colleagues to this terrible pandemic. For all those who are in hospital fighting the virus, as well as others who are ill but not hospitalized, I pray for a speedy recovery. Madam Speaker, since March 2021, during which we peaked at 15,944 new cases, the number of new cases of COVID-19 has been decreasing month on month. In April, we had 6,234 new cases. In May, we had 2,817 new cases. In June, 1,572 new cases. And in July, we have recorded so far 1,238 new cases. Madam Speaker, our July numbers are showing an uptick relative to June. In June 2021, we averaged 52 cases per day. So far in July, we are averaging 62 cases per day. Yesterday, we recorded 122 new cases, our single highest day in terms of numbers in over 8 weeks since May 2021. Madam Speaker, a single day case number by itself is not necessarily indicative of a trend. So let us examine what is happening with our positivity rate. And the positivity rate graph is now being displayed for those who can see it. Madam Speaker, the graph displayed shows our test positivity rate by epidemiological week since the start of the pandemic in Jamaica. There was a general decrease in positivity between week 11 and week 25 of 2021, from the peak of 38.9% to 6% in the week ending June 26, 2021, which is highlighted on the graph in front of us. Since week 26, however, there has been an increase in positivity. Our average positivity rate for the last 7 days was 8.8%. And for week 29, the positivity rate so far is 9.9%. Madam Speaker, as the graph shows, this puts us in the high transmission range. Madam Speaker, you will recall that our target is to get our positivity rate down to 5% or below. We are almost doubling that now. Madam Speaker, the graph now being displayed shows our reproductive rate, the R0, that famous variable. The reproductive rate represents how fast the virus is spreading by measuring how many additional persons are infected on average by one infected person. You will recall, Madam Speaker, that the advice from our epidemiologists was that we needed to maintain our reproductive rate below 1 for at least a 6-week period. We managed to do so for 16 weeks from week 11 to week 26 of 2021. However, since week 26, that is the week ending July 3rd, 2021, our R0 has exceeded 1 and is now at 1.1, as shown in the graph. Madam Speaker, we are also seeing some changes in the geographical spread. The graph that should now be displaying shows our cumulative cases and active cases per 100,000 of population in each parish. Graph, please. The darker shading represents higher numbers. The top map, which you are now seeing, shows the total number of cases per 100,000 of population. It shows St. James, Trelawney, St. Thomas, and Kingston and St. Andrew being the parishes most impacted since the start of the pandemic. The map below shows the active cases per 100,000 of population. This gives an indication of the relative extent of spread. So if you compare the top and bottom graphs, you will see that the western parishes are experiencing a greater level of spread. Hanover and Westmoreland, for example, are seeing a level of spread on a per capita basis that is 2 to 3 times that of Kingston and St. Andrew. Over the past 7 days, Hanover and Westmoreland recorded 107 new cases, whilst the KSA, that is Kingston and St. Andrew, and St. Catherine combined recorded 197 new cases yesterday. Madam Speaker, the purpose of my presentation to this Honourable House today is not to announce any changes to the measures which currently are set to expire on August 10. However, based on the early warning signs that we are seeing, the COVID subcommittee of Cabinet will be meeting this weekend to review the situation to consider whether there may be need to tighten some of the measures in advance of August 10. And I will report back to this House. Well, we'll be on recess, but we will report to the nation via press conference, possibly Tuesday, if we do intend to make any new changes to the orders. As I had done last month when I announced the new measures, I want to urge all Jamaicans to exercise extreme caution. This is not the time to become complacent. I want to reinforce the need for everyone to be vigilant about observing the protocols and keeping ourselves and each other safe. Some may say that I'm being alarmist and that some amount of uptick in our numbers would have been natural, seeing that we have allowed greater movement and greater gatherings. Madam Speaker, we have seen from the experience of other countries and indeed from our own experience how insidious this virus is and how quickly spikes can occur. The US CDC reported last week that the 7-day moving average for daily new cases had increased by 69.3% in 1 week between July 9 and 16. 1 week. Madam Speaker, the new, more transmissible variant, the Delta variant, is now the dominant variant globally. It now represents almost all cases in the UK and 83% of all genome sequence samples in the United States. While the samples we have sent off for genome sequencing have not indicated the presence of the variant in Jamaica thus far, it would be wishful thinking for us to believe that it will not make its way to Jamaica, if it is not already here. Madam Speaker, several countries whose vaccination levels far exceed ours are seeing spikes in new cases as a result of the Delta and other variants. However, the data also clearly shows that the vaccines are effective in preventing hospitalization or death. In the United States, 97% of the persons being hospitalized are unvaccinated. Madam Speaker, in closing, I want to highlight two key messages. One, we're starting to see an uptick in our numbers and maybe in the early stages of our third wave. The only way for us to prevent this is for Jamaicans to take personal responsibility, to exercise extreme caution and diligence in observing the protocols, wearing masks properly, not under the chin, not on the side of the face, hanging by the ear, but covering nose and mouth. Maintaining proper hand hygiene and maintaining physical distance. Two, the vaccines have proven to be highly effective in preventing hospitalization and death. I want to urge everyone who is eligible to take the vaccine. I want to urge everyone who has already received one dose to take the second dose of the vaccine. We are now 16 months into the pandemic, and we know how the virus spread. We know what works and what does not work. The established protocols have been proven to work. Madam Speaker, I want to reject the notion that opening up the economy and maintaining a low infection rate are not possible together. Both things can work together. It is possible to go about your normal daily activities, but to do so in a safe way. What is driving the spread is indiscipline, complacency, and lack of diligence in observing the protocols. We have to decide whether to go about our activities in a disciplined and cautious way, keep our economy open and earn our livelihoods, or whether we want the path of indiscipline, which will inevitably lead to a spike forcing us to tighten measures. The choice is ours, individually and collectively.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, I want to thank you for the update you have given to the Parliament and to the country, and also to join in expressing our condolences to the families of those who have lost loved ones as a consequence of COVID-19. The concern we have as well, Prime Minister, is with the increase in numbers as you have outlined. The reality is that today we have seen an aberration in terms of the numbers of the rates that we have seen over the past couple of weeks, as you have indicated on the graph as well. And we saw a positivity rate today of 16.1%. The concern that all of us have in this country, Prime Minister, in addition to what we are seeing as the increase in the positivity rate, increase in the reproductive rate, and increase in the death rate, as was mentioned last week, I think it was, in this very House, that even though we were seeing numbers coming down in terms of the total positive tests each day, the death rates were increasing. And I shudder to think, Prime Minister, as all of us do, what the death rate will be if it continues at this rate now that we are seeing an uptick in the numbers of both the positivity rate and the reproductive rate. Prime Minister, the country has, as you have indicated, and as we have all seen, opened up various sectors of the economy. You will recall when the announcement was made that the leader of the opposition said that you're caught between a rock and a hard place, essentially, in terms of balancing what is basically hoping and intended to do. And we are seeing where, and I had to comment some time ago on the first major public event that had persons going to a particular fete. And the clips that came back, Prime Minister, Madam Speaker, were people all over the place without the masks. There also was another clip, Prime Minister, that showed a particular leader at a particular party, and it was only that leader who had on a mask. Nobody else in the clip had on a mask. Now, we'll talk about that afterwards. But the reality, Prime Minister, Madam Speaker, is that inasmuch as the country is opening to these events, there has to be the responsibility, and you did indicate, Prime Minister, the personal responsibility that people have to have in terms of their own protection and protecting themselves from others. The Delta variant you mentioned, that we have had no tests so far, genomic sequencing, that has identified it in the country. The samples, however, that have been sent that have come back negative for Delta have been only up to April, May, and a couple samples from June. So almost for the 3.5 weeks of June left, and for the 3 weeks in July so far, it could very well be that those samples that come back will show that Delta is here. I am of the view it's here. In fact, I am of the view too that it is the reason where we're having the death rates that we are having in terms of the weekly mortality rate. But until we can confirm, and it goes back, Prime Minister, to the need from early, as we have discussed before, and correspondence passed across the floor, the need for the genomic sequencing machine to be here from very early so that we would not have to depend on outsourcing it from friendly international partners as well as CARPHA. Now, Prime Minister, the country is on an edge right now because even though today the rate is 16.1, and quite correctly from public health measures, we should be looking at the average weekly rate. The reality is that people are wondering whether we are doing sufficient testing and whether we are gathering the information that is accounting for this. And why I say that, Prime Minister, and I will reiterate as I did some time ago, that I think that we have to change the protocol in terms of our testing. And even though we are seeing only those samples that come to the public health facilities, the hospital and the health centers, and the samples are done there for persons who present with flu-like illness or tentative diagnosis of COVID, it might be prudent as a country for us to start doing some other samples, random samples in the community, to see whether it accords to what we are getting in the public health sector, and to say, okay, we are satisfied that we are capturing all the numbers. The reason being given for the deaths is that people are presenting late. Might be one of the reasons for it, but I think it's more than that. And Prime Minister, I am happy to note that only yesterday the Minister of Health indicated that there is indicative agreement to grant the importation of ivermectin into the country for use in the private sector, although not utilization approved in the public sector. So one hurdle has been seemingly been overcome. And it therefore gives us an option in terms of treatment for those persons who are non-hospitalized patients. And if the science, as we have been presenting it, is to be believed, then it is less likely that we'll have greater hospitalizations. Because right now, we are seeing that the uptick in the hospitalization is there. We are averaging about 80 to 90 per week within the last 3 to 4 weeks. Last week to this week and today we are at 110 now. So we have been seen moving from 88, 90, 96 and 110 now. And this is also worrying. It's also worrying because when you look and you disaggregate the hospitalization numbers, you see the number of critical and the number of moderately ill patients are also jacking up. So, in as much as there is the statistics which is showing about the deaths, about the hospitalization, about the fact that, as I mentioned, there is a possible another option here in terms of treatment, we are not seeing a leveling off, and as your graph has indicated, we are seeing that there is an uptick. Now, what is important and would require an explanation, Prime Minister, is why is it that we are seeing in the parishes of Hanover and Westmoreland the per capita the highest numbers in terms of COVID. Now, although a particular event occurred about 7 weeks ago, 6-7 weeks ago, which was Mocha Fest, the reality is that we are wondering we are wondering whether that has any bearing on what we are seeing now in terms of the numbers. And if it is an indication of what may happen in terms of other events to happen across the entire island. We know our vaccination rate is not where it should be, Prime Minister, and we were advised yesterday that despite the best measures by the government to get vaccines into the country, there are other events that preclude us sometimes from getting it. There was the supposed arrival from South Africa last week of vaccines, but because of domestic events in South Africa, they have prevented those from leaving. Despite the promises that from June that the USA would have been distributing the vaccines, we are almost at the end of July and they have not distributed nor reached here yet. So we have that particular problem, and the balancing between vaccination and the economy opening up is really lopsided, in that we are not like where the other countries are, which we usually take our cue from, which is the USA, Canada, and the UK, which have significant numbers of their population being vaccinated, and they are reopening the economy. So the final exhortation you had to the country Prime Minister about personal responsibility is very important. It's very important in light of the fact that we have less vaccinated persons. The economy has to show some amount of opening, but at the same time we do not want the numbers of COVID positive persons to increase, the numbers of deaths to increase, which would have a crippling effect if it reaches a certain hiatus. So, Prime Minister, the appeal to the country, we will endorse that. we have been, and we continue to do that. We continue to urge people to wear the masks. We continue to urge people to do the measures of social distancing as well as sanitization. But we also urge them to really think about how much they imbibe when they go to these places. So, when you imbibe, there's less relaxation or more relaxation. So there's less likelihood for them to adhere to the measures. And could I also say, Prime Minister, that one of the things that these event holders should be held to account for is the having marshals around and within the event so that they can walk around and encourage and re-encourage those persons who are patrons at the event who might necessarily want to take off their mask and have a jolly good time. So the marshalling is important. The measures are there, but unless they are enforced by those who organize it, then we run the risk that the country may be having negative returns from reopening the economy. So, Prime Minister, we are supportive of the measures, and we are also in agreement with you that if the numbers start to show increase, as we have said before, that we will support a tightening of the measures so that the country can breathe. Thank you.
Just two questions, Prime Minister, and I note your carefulness in not preempting what is to happen on the revision that is being done now. But and you've also been careful not to predict any new wave, third or otherwise. But in the event that we see increase in hospitalization, does the country have enough oxygen in storage available for the hospitals? And secondly, if you could remind us of the experience last year in relation to both emancipation and independence, whether or not that was a cause for an increase in the numbers. I thought we had our second wave then, but probably you could shed some further light on that. And in light of the concerns that we're seeing, would there not be the need for even more testing than we are doing now? And I know that we only test those people with symptoms, but perhaps we might want to increase the testing as we were doing late last year, early this year. Thanks.
Thank you, members, for the questions and for the support. Madam Speaker, just by way of update, though not specifically requested by the member from Central St. Mary, the genome sequencing machine is in the procurement process. The procurement process has turned out to be, not that I'm saying that procurement is an excuse, but it is a long process, and so I agree with you. But I was just informed that they are almost at the end of it, and hopefully the machine will be here in another couple of weeks, and then we would be able to do our own analysis of the variants that exist from the samples. Both members who spoke raised the issue of testing, and just to be categorical, I believe we need to do more testing. I believe it is also the view of the Ministry of Health, though the Ministry of Health has taken a more targeted approach of testing persons with symptoms, testing persons who present with flu-like symptoms in the hospitals, and including as well testing that is taking place commercially for persons who have to travel. And so all of that forms part of the testing. Now, the challenge with testing is that we are in a point in time in the pandemic where persons are reluctant to be randomly sampled. So the Ministry of Health going out to do their surveillance in communities may not get the take-up of persons to actually increase random sampling. But I do agree that it is important to have the random sample as a verification of your routine sampling. So this is something that I'm certain that is being discussed within the Ministry of Health as to how and whether or not they can conduct such random samplings. In terms of oxygen, the last report I had, and this is not, I'm now speaking without the advice of the Minister of Health, so I have not consulted on this. But the last report I had is that they had increased their capacity for oxygen. So yes, based upon the last report, the number of beds that they have, they should have sufficient oxygen in store and capabilities to provide for the number of beds, which are now around 700 beds. And in terms of the experience that we had last year with the emancipendence period, you will recall that we actually started to see signs of increase a week or two before the Emancipendence weekend. But certainly the Emancipendence weekend would have been a large gathering and all around the country. We are hoping that, well, no, not hoping, we have put in measures to ensure that it will not be the same free-for-all in terms of this Emancipendence weekend, that the events that are permitted are controlled events. In our last year with the Emancipendence period, there were really very little control over events. Now, with the protocols that we have put in place, the events should be controlled. That is, the large events. Now, during the Emancipendence period, you will also have many small events. And even now, we are seeing many small events. I know my constituency would have many little street parties and, round robins and so forth. Like most of our constituencies, you're going to see an increase in that. We are going to be examining this very carefully on the weekend to see what additional measures we can put in place to ensure that these events do not contribute to a spike. But I want the country to bear in mind, because in these matters, there's a lot of blame to go around and a lot of fingers to be pointed. But we should be careful to understand that the recrafted measures allows for greater movement and an increased number in terms of gatherings. Now, students are going back to school for summer school. There are many events being kept, including tours right across the country, many political events, and to address directly the member from Central St. Mary, yes, I did see some videos circulating of a particular party. And just to be clear, I was not a patron. Well, to put it in another way, I was not there. I just want to be clear. I saw an image being presented, and yes, there were some similarities, but it is not me. I was not. I was not there. Though it was a party of a close associate of mine, I have put myself under curfew and lockdown when it comes to these things. Because I know, as they say in Jamaica, my name easy to call. So I wasn't there. Well, you would know how that goes. So, Madam Speaker, forgive my departure from the matters at hand. But it is important that we, as leaders who are asking persons to abide by the rules, that we ourselves abide by the rules. So I do try to keep myself away from these events. I have been invited to many events, and I have respectfully and courteously declined because of these precise issues of persons trying to undermine the legitimacy of government by saying, see, they're double standard, or they're doing something that they're asking us not to do. So, Madam Speaker, just to assure this House that when we meet, when the Cabinet Subcommittee on COVID meets on the weekend, that it is very likely that there will be measures announced by Tuesday of next week. Very likely. So I was just using the opportunity, Madam Speaker, to put Jamaica on notice, and seeing that Parliament will be on recess to inform Parliament of the actions that we are taking.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, the fact that we have gone through the ease, and I'm certain a number of persons out there are very happy for it. But what I've realized is that we have slowed down on the advertisement. We have slowed down on the announcements. Before, we used to have communities, people coming through and making sure that people adhere and abide by the rules. Now that we have given some ease, it is more important, or most important now, for us to ensure that we constantly remind the communities, because as you said before, people are just having little things all over the place. And the constant reminder would have helped a very far way. The other thing I would love to see done, Prime Minister, is that we get more locations in terms of free testing. We have the different clinics, and while we might not have that heavy volume, but people should be told that they can go to these clinics to get these testing done. So I personally am very worried, and I'm also happy that people are out there now feeling a little bit more freer, because that is what people really want. They don't want to be trapped for too long. But at the same time, we have to ensure that we take all the precautionary measures to ensure that lives are preserved and protected.
There have been a few large events since the announcement. You said the monitoring, those would have been monitored, I have no doubt, and you're satisfied that those events so far have been in compliance with and keeping.
Madam Speaker, I thank the members for their comments and questions. In terms of the large events, I must say that the promoters have, by and large, abided by the protocols and the measures. I'm aware of one large event that took place by virtue of a direct report that I received, that it kept within the time. They had separate entrances for different categories of persons. They had the COVID marshals in place, and they had sanitization booths in place, and it worked very well. The patrons seemed to have enjoyed themselves, though I gather that the masks disappeared the later it got and the more alcohol was consumed. But by and large, it seemed that the event was conducted under the prescribed control circumstances. And I think this is going to be the new norm. We can't not have events forever, but we will have to have events in a controlled manner. And this was a good test run to see what worked, what does not work, and how it can be improved.
Minister of Education, Honorable Phil Williams.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to provide the House and the public with an update on the results of the 2021 Primary Exit Profile PEP assessment. This year's results comprise the ability test component administered as a single test for grade 6 students and the combined performance in their grade 4 literacy and numeracy tests and grade 4 PEP performance task in mathematics and language arts. Madam Speaker, there is no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused an unprecedented crisis in all areas of life. In the field of education, this emergency has led to the closure of most face-to-face activities of educational institutions in order to prevent the spread of the virus and mitigate its impact. The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information had to pivot and make adjustments to the administration of the PEP 6 exams given the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the education system. Madam Speaker, in addition to the usual channels available for retrieving students' scores and placement information, the Ministry has also offered online access to the results for the first time. This is available at parents.dpisonline.com. The site is designed to present parent reports to all parents and guardians of students who are transitioning from primary level institutions to high schools. Madam Speaker, I now provide a synopsis of the placement and scoring mechanism used this year. The computation of the placement score for 2021 comprises of 5 tests: the grade 4 literacy, the grade 4 numeracy, grade 4 PEP performance task, which would be the mathematics, and the grade 4 PEP performance task or language arts, and the grade 6 ability test. Similar to the grade 6 achievement test or GSAT, the primary exit profile uses the total placement score for ranking and placing students based on a weighted formula of standardized test scores. After using several statistical models to test multiple scenarios, the most equitable weighting that determined the placement of students in 2021 provides for an equivalent ratio contribution by grade level as follows. Grade 4 would have been 20% and grade 6, 80%. In terms of the rationale for weights, the cancellation of the PEP 5 performance task test in 2020 created a gap in the scores that were intended to be used as a contribution to placement for the current grade 6 cohort of students. Consequently, this group of grade 6 students was placed in high school using their 2019 grade 4 performance task scores along with their PEP 6 ability test. For this year, 2021, a total of 37,278 students were registered to sit the PEP ability test. 37,139 actually sat the ability test as there were 139 registered students who were absent. Of the total number registered to sit, 4,420 were from independent schools or sat as private candidates. The other 32,858 were registered in the public schools. Madam Speaker, 31,479 or 84.4% of students were placed in one of their 7 choices. And as you know, Madam Speaker, since 2015, parents have been given the opportunity to indicate 2 additional school choices to the standard 5 that they had in the past. These 2 additional choices were selected from a cluster of schools that were within a 10-mile radius of their attending schools. 11.5% of the students were placed in secondary level schools that are in proximity to the schools they currently attend. A further 2.1%, or 778 students, were placed manually in secondary level schools in proximity to the address they submitted at registration. Madam Speaker, even though the tests and/or the components used to place students have changed over the past 3 years, the mechanism used to place students remains the same. We're therefore confident that even in this unprecedented COVID-19 crisis, the method used to place students this year is fair, reliable, and consistent with what previously existed. Madam Speaker, with the Ministry taking the decision to cancel the PEP 6 performance tasks and the curriculum-based tests, a hybrid approach was used to place the students. Based on this combination of scores, we're not able to speak to the achievement of the students in relation to the skills and competencies as outlined by the National Standards Curriculum at grade 6 level. The students were, however, placed on pathways using the scores attained on the literacy tests and the language arts performance task. Madam Speaker, in reporting students' achievement of the National Standards Curriculum at grade 4, the following 4 categories are used for all 4 subjects: beginning, developing, proficient, and highly proficient. The table being projected outlines students' performance as described by the 4 reporting categories. And so you will see in the beginning and developing category for mathematics, 52.4% of the students were at that achievement level. And the 47.6% were at the proficient or highly proficient level. In the language arts, the results were somewhat different. 43.6% were in the beginning or developing achievement levels, and 56.4% were in the proficient or highly proficient level. The results from students' performance at grade 4 in 2019 show that more than 50% of all students are at the proficient or highly proficient level in language arts, and 48% of students were proficient or highly proficient for mathematics. It must be noted that majority of the students were at the developing stage for mathematics in 2019. Madam Speaker, it is important to note that the ability test assesses how well students are able to reason with numbers and words. The 2 skills assessed in this test are quantitative and verbal reasoning. The distribution for the ability test remains normal, and students are therefore performing at the expected levels based on the Ministry's assessment. In terms of placement of special needs students, Madam Speaker, this year there were 27 students registered for PEP 2021 with special needs. These special needs include physical challenges such as being wheelchair bound, visually impaired, hearing impaired, and intellectually challenged. The unique needs of each child were assessed by the special education unit, and the schools they are placed in are evaluated to ensure that they will be fairly accommodated. Our students entering high school will be placed in one of 3 pathways. So secondary pathway 1 would be those students who are categorized as showing competence and are deemed ready to access the content at grade 7. Secondary pathway 2 would be students who are categorized as on par in achieving the required skills at grade 7, and these students are in need of minimum support in accessing content at grade 7. And secondary pathway 3 would be those students who are categorized as needing intense, ongoing support in accessing the content at grade 7. Students who are on secondary pathway 3 will undergo a psychoeducational assessment to determine the targeted program of study they will receive at the secondary level. Madam Speaker, 23,356 students were placed on pathway 1, which is 63%. Of this amount, 10,154 were males and 13,202 were females. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, as students transition to high school in 2021, the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information is cognizant of the fact that no statements are being made of students' achievement of the National Standards Curriculum at grade 6. In an effort to provide data on students' achievement of the National Standards Curriculum, the Ministry administered diagnostic tests in the 4 main subject areas: language arts, mathematics, social studies, and science. The results are being assessed and will be made available to the grade 7 teachers as the students transition. The Ministry, Madam Speaker, will also be introducing the National School Learning and Intervention Plan, NSLIP, to make up the learning loss as students advance in the system. The regional offices have been supporting schools and parents in accessing and printing results where the service is needed. And there are a number of phone numbers that parents can call: 888-338-2283 or 888-724-8463 for any queries or concerns. We want to express our sincere thanks, Madam Speaker, to the school leaders, the teachers, education officers, invigilators, and administrators at all levels who worked with our students amidst tremendous challenges to help them get to this point. And let me say again, congratulations to all our students. We will continue to work with you to help you continue working at your very best. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, this time I ask to invite.
No, we have some questions. Minister, could you indicate, on the assumption that we can resume face-to-face in September, what is the plan for schools, in the sense that even if we go face-to-face, a school that would have, let's say, 2,000 students wouldn't be able to accommodate them in the way that they would pre-COVID. So on the assumption that we can resume face-to-face, what is the plan for those schools? Are we going to have some students online 1 day, 2 days, some online? Because speaking to a couple of principals, they are not totally clear at this stage as to what will happen, assuming we go back to face-to-face.
Thank you for the question. So we've been having a number of, or a series of consultations by region. We've had 2 so far, and we're answering questions like that in terms of our meetings. So we have to be guided by the Ministry of Health and Wellness just in terms of the COVID numbers come September. But we are preparing for any eventuality. So in the case where we can be back in the face-to-face environment for schools that have a lot of students, the directive has been to use the blended approach, where, as you've said, there'll be some students coming in day 1, others day 2, and some students are online and you rotate. So that is the approach that we're looking at for our schools in the cases where they're at capacity or over capacity in terms of students. Of course, there are many schools that are under capacity, and so would be able to accommodate students for face-to-face.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Just a quick question, Minister. The 139 registered students that did not get to sit the exam, the fact that they will not be able to sit it again, there is any way in which you can locate or the school can locate these students to ensure that we can do some tracking to see what is happening in regards to them? And just quickly, I probably will not be able to articulate it as best as possible, but I would just want to find out, in respect to the grade 4 literacy, if you have to use it in the new academic year, will you be able, what percentage would you be able to give an account for in terms of having those registered that you can use it to help you to create that balance that you're going to need if we continue having this kind of spike, or we are not able to go back to face-to-face? I'm not too certain if you can, if you understand what I'm trying to say. The grade 4 literacy for 2020, what percentage of students were able to do it as a result of the not having the instrument, or not going online, or not going to face-to-face? Could you tell me, because that is going to help you if we continue on the same path next year to assist us into creating the result that we need to move them to higher learning.
For the 139 students that did not, that were absent for the test, chances are they showed up for the assessment, but our data, we can tell by our data, and so that assessment would help us to place them as well. They will be placed, even though they did not show up for the test. And in terms of your question about the grade 4 for 2020, there was no test in 2020. There was no grade 4 test. Yeah.
Madam Speaker, I ask you to invite the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries to make a statement.
Minister? Minister, do you have a copy of your statement?
I do.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, whether our farmers are planting yams in the hills of southern Trelawney, or tending to coffee and strawberries in the hills of east and west rural St. Andrew, whether that farmer is growing mangoes in St. Thomas, or planting sorrel in St. Catherine, cassava in South Clarendon, cabbage in Douglas Castle, or if that farmer is operating on the plains of South Manchester and South St. Elizabeth, curating the best scallion and melon that the world has to offer. The cry for protection for weather events is island-wide.
Don't forget Callaloo. Don't forget Callaloo.
Well, the Prime Minister Makial is substantial. As elected members of Parliament, most of us know the pain and the heartbreak that farmers face from extreme rain, periods of drought, and hurricane-force winds. I have seen it firsthand across my constituency. And last year, in my capacity as minister, when I toured after Eta and Zeta had wreaked havoc, wiping out many farms and destroying many livelihoods, again I saw firsthand the pain. Madam Speaker, when I was appointed to this position,
the Prime Minister, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, directed me to look more at some of the fundamental issues that have held back agriculture and to work on engaging the private sector in a more robust way so that we could remove some of those fundamental issues and better serve the interests of the farmer and fisher folk while unleashing the true potential of our country. Today, Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to announce that through the work of GK Insurance Group, the brave, resilient, and hard-working farmers and fisherfolk of Jamaica now have access to a long-awaited, much-anticipated crop, livestock, and fishing insurance scheme. Madam Speaker, the GK Weather Protect is a private sector initiative led by GK Insurance along with international partners Munich Re and Raincoat that provides a parametric insurance coverage for farmers and fisherfolk against prolonged rain, heavy wind, and drought. Madam Speaker, this could not have come at a better time. As we all are aware, this is hurricane season, and I know a number of us held our collective breath at the threat of Hurricane Elsa, because as a small island state in the Caribbean, we know too well the damage that these events have caused our agricultural sector. Data from 2004 to 2017 indicate that the agricultural sector suffered approximately $196 billion in losses from the impact of weather-related events. More recently, last year in October, the sector experienced some $2.5 billion in crop damage, affecting over 14,000 farmers. While we only got Tropical Storm Elsa, our farmers still suffered. Those in Clarendon, St. Catherine, St. Thomas, and St. Andrew. For livestock, we have an estimated loss of $5 million, affecting 443 farmers who lost pigs, broilers, layers, and goats. For crops, some 1,157 farmers were impacted to the tune of $29 million, with the majority of loss coming from vegetables, condiments, legumes, and banana. Likewise, Madam Speaker, our fishing industry has been plagued by weather events. Our records show that in 2005, with the passage of Hurricanes Emily and Dennis, the fisheries sector suffered approximately $330 million in losses, impacting 2,000 fishers. While in 2012, Hurricane Sandy left an estimated $90 million worth of damage to the fisheries sector in its trail. Madam Speaker, this is how challenging this issue has been. But Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to advise that yesterday, July 20, 2021, the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries hosted the launch of the GK Weather Protect insurance policy. So the GK General Insurance Weather Protect policy is now live. And in fact, Madam Speaker, yesterday we signed up our very first 2 farmers for their crop insurance policy. Novlet Headlam, who hails from rural St. Andrew, who farms lettuce, cabbage, and strawberries, and Giovanni Nicholson, a Blue Mountain coffee farmer, were the first 2 farmers to sign up for a crop insurance policy. Madam Speaker, because of the high risk of the sector and the extreme vulnerability of our country, especially due to climate change, policies of this nature are not easy to craft. The reality is compounded when one reflects that the majority of our agricultural sector is small holding farmers that are less than 1 hectare in size. As such, any successful insurance policy, Madam Speaker, has to be affordable, accessible, and flexible. To that end, the Ministry of Agriculture's team, led by the Rural Agricultural Development Authority and the National Fisheries Authority, had many meetings with the GK insurance team spanning the last 8 months. Additionally, the GK insurance team ensured that our farmers and fishers were integral in the conceptualization of this policy, as no one knows the intricacies like they do. So farmers and fishers were interviewed so that the team could fully understand their fears, concerns, historical losses, and be guided accordingly. This policy therefore seeks to address all those concerns. It is a parametric policy, which means that once the tier is reached, the payout is automatic. There is no need for damage assessment. It's an automatic payout that will be given to the farmer once the trigger is reached. It is flexible. Yeah, I think that is. It is flexible, so the farmer or fisher will be able to choose whether they want to protect their crop or livestock from wind, from rain, from drought, or whether they want to do all of them. But they can choose an individual peril, or they can choose all the perils together. Additionally, they can choose the season that they want to protect. So for example, you may want to have insurance if you're in South St. Elizabeth against drought early in the year, and insurance against rain late in the year. So it has that degree of flexibility, and it is accessible. So people can go and sign up online. You don't have to go into our office, or you can go to your RADA office or your National Fisheries Authority office. Just to give you an idea of how the policy is structured. It is for fishers and farmers who are registered with the National Fisheries Authority or RADA. And for example, one of the triggers is in relation to extreme amounts of rainfall in a 3-day period. So if you have over 35 centimeters of rain, for a payment of $5,700 as premium, it would automatically trigger a payout of $25,000. And that is only if you have insured up to 100,000, and it goes up. Again, if you got over 43 centimeters of rain, the automatic trigger, without anybody having to visit your farm, would be an automatic payout of $50,000. And it's the same in relation to drought. Again, if you are going to guarantee risk of 100,000, it's only $5,700, and if you have drought for 2 weeks, there's an automatic trigger of 20,000, 5 weeks, 50,000, 8 weeks, 80,000. And again, there is no damage assessment needed. It also covers hurricane force winds, and it protects you even if the hurricane wind speeds are within 25 miles of the parish in which you farm. So, Madam Speaker, I think it's fair to say that GK Insurance really looked at all the boxes. And I must tell you, they went through a lot of data, and it was very important for us to see is what would have been the impact of the recent weather events. And if the farmers were insured under this Weather Protect program last year, October, they would have gotten not only a payout, but they would have gotten the maximum payout based on the intensity of the rain and the amount of days on which it fell for. So, Madam Speaker, what I will say to my farmers and fishers is to get insured under Weather Protect now. Not only have we looked at the flexibility, but I know the question will come up. How quickly will farmers be paid? And the GK Insurance team has as one of their guaranteed standards, and we were very heavy on this, that within 7 days of the event, the money will hit the account of the farmer or fisher. So, Madam Speaker, we believe that we can play a part. And as such, as government, Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to announce that we are going to be providing $3,500 per person for the first 1,000 farmers and fishers that sign up for the GK Weather Protect policy. So the government will subsidize their premium to the tune of $3,500. And it doesn't stop there, Madam Speaker, because you know we always do a little bit more for women and youth. So for women and youth who are in that first 1,000 farmers to sign up, they will be subsidized to the tune of $5,000 for their premium for their first policy. So, Madam Speaker, if you're a registered farmer or fisher, you can sign up online, in stores, or via telephone. The number is 888-429-5454. You can also sign up at any Bill Express outlet island-wide or at your RADA office or your National Fisheries Authority office. Farmers, fisherfolk, the government has shown to you time and time again that you are important to us, that your profession is valid, and that we will do all we can to support and protect you. Seize the opportunity as we create a modern, efficient, and safe agriculture and fisheries sector. This, Madam Speaker, is the new face of food. Thank you.
Member Cousins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me thank the Minister for his statement. This, Madam Speaker, is a non-contentious issue. I certainly would have addressed this issue some weeks ago when we discussed the insurance for the fisher folk and the farmers, and I am happy to note that the Minister is listening, and this is a move in the right direction. Minister?
I hope he keeps listening.
No, man. He's doing well. Minister, we are hopeful that other insurance companies will come on board to allow for more options for the farmers and to also demonstrate the value they have for the agricultural sector. It's important because Grace Kennedy alone cannot be the option for the Jamaican farmers. But nevertheless, we are grateful for this initiative. It's a start. It is a move in the right direction. The issues of flooding, the issues of drought are perennial issues that touch and concern farmers on a yearly basis. This is also in keeping with the catastrophic risk bond facility that the government recently entered into, which I believe is going to assist the farmers down the road as well. So, Minister, we support this move, we support this program fully, and we're hoping, I have not heard much about what the premiums will be for the farmers, but I'm hoping that the small farmers will be able to buy into this initiative, and certainly you have my support in terms of selling the product to my farmers within my constituency and the farmers across Jamaica. I think it is something that is absolutely necessary. It is absolutely critical. And sometimes, you know, the start is very important. It better them have something to rely on than nothing at all. It places less of a burden on the Ministry of Agriculture, because if they have this facility, then the Ministry of Agriculture don't have to come and buy and intervene whenever there's a flood or there's a drought. And so the resources of the ministry can certainly be directed in other directions, such as, for example, a proper import substitution strategy which will benefit Jamaica in the long run. So, Minister, well done, and we look forward to the rollout of the program and the successful implementation of the program. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. And just to say clearly, I agree with you. I definitely want to see more companies coming on stream, especially outside of insurance. We know one of the big challenges our farmers still have is access to capital, and we do hope more of our financial sector will answer that call. I will say that it has been crafted for the small farmer, so the rate I think is reasonable. It really works out to about 5.7% of what you're insuring. So if you're insuring 100,000, it's 5,700. That's the premium, right? And I think that is quite manageable. Again, if you can work it out, if you go up to 500,000, you can work it out. So I think, especially for the small farmer, which was important for us, to work with GK to get that right, it is affordable, it is accessible. Clearly, I joined with you in encouraging the farmers to take it up because, again, it's a guaranteed time of payment. And I know one of the struggles that farmers had, even when we helped them, is the time it takes to go through the bureaucracy to get to them. So thank you for your support, and we look forward to other insurance companies coming on stream and for us to have multiple crop insurance providers in our local. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: the Disabilities Regulations 2021 under the Disabilities Act, certified appropriation account for head 28,000 from the Department of Legal Reform for the year 2016-2017, and head 4,000A, Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport for the year 2015-2016.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, the Minister of Labour and Social Security will move the following motion. Whereas, by virtue of Section 46(1) of the Disabilities Act 2014, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the Minister may make regulations to give effect to the purposes of the Act. And whereas Section 46(3) of the Act provides that regulations made under the Act shall be subject to affirmative resolution, and whereas on the 21st day of July 2021, the Minister made the Disabilities Regulations 2021, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Disabilities Regulations 2021 resolution. And 2. The Disabilities Regulation 2021, which were laid on the table of the House on the 21st day of July 2021, are hereby affirmed.
Questions and answers to questions.
Madam Speaker, I invite the member to ask a question standing in my name.
Madam Speaker, can the Minister of Finance answer the questions which are tabled in my name?
Madam Speaker, the question that has been posed by the member from St. Andrew, what is it, Eastern? South. Multi-part question. I'll read a question and provide a response. Can the Minister of Finance and the Public Service confirm whether the government has a policy in relation to investment of public resources held by public bodies? Response. There is no general standardized policy in relation to the investment of resources held by public bodies. However, the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act, the PBMAA, the Public Bodies Amendment Regulations 2017 Part 5, which are hereinafter will we'll call the PBMA regulations, stipulate the requirements for the acquisition and disposition of shares by public bodies. The public bodies are further guided by the investment policy for the government of Jamaica in developing their own policies. The government of Jamaica's investment policy indicates that the policy is not applicable to the financial assets of public bodies. It also states that a public body's investment activities are to be guided by provisions in establishing statutes and or in its investment policy approved by the board. In effect, therefore, public bodies develop investment policies in keeping with the provisions of the PBMA and the Government of Jamaica investment policy. So each public body has the authority to develop its own investment policy in keeping with some broad guidelines. If the answer is in the affirmative, can the Minister indicate A, the policy, B, whether it's standardized across all public sector entities, C, if there are exemptions the same, D, the reasons for any such exemptions, and E, whether there are any exempt entities? The responses to these are included in the response to one above. Number 3, are public bodies free to invest in private sector companies by the placement of shares or stock options? Response, public bodies may acquire shares in private sector companies subject to the provisions of their investment policy and the PBMA regulations. The PBMA regulations, which govern the acquisition of shares, places certain limitation on the acquisition of shares, including those in private companies. One of those limitations, for example, is that the approval of the Minister of Finance is required for the acquisition of shares in entities other than those listed on a stock exchange operating in Jamaica. Other restrictions in the regulations are that public bodies which receive more than 50% of their funding from the consolidated fund are prohibited from acquiring shares in private companies without the approval of the Minister of Finance. Another limitation is that the value of investment in shares shall not exceed 10% of the public body's investment portfolio. And another one is that the investment by a public body in a private company should not result in that public body having a controlling interest in the private company. Question 4. Are there guardrails as to how the surplus cash of public bodies should be deployed? The guardrails in respect of the deployment of surplus cash include the following. The public bodies regulations enable the Financial Secretary to request normal and special financial distributions from self-defining public bodies. These requests are, however, subject to assessment of the commitments and cash needs of the entities. Entities which are not deemed to be self-financing are funded through warrants and have to demonstrate the need for the funds prior to allocation. In addition, the regulations restrict a public body that receives more than 50% of its funding from the consolidated fund from acquiring shares without the Minister's approval. Corporate plans, including budgets, are approved by the Cabinet and Parliament annually. This guides the level of expenditure which may be undertaken during a given year. Number 5. Is there a limit on the surplus cash holdings allowed to be placed on short-term deposits or investments to support the operations of the public sector entity? Response. The Ministry of Finance and the Public Service has not issued a general policy which guides the limit to be placed on short-term deposits to support the operations of public bodies. This is expected to be guided by investment policies of the respective public bodies and the PBMA regulations. So again, the PBMA regulations provide the broad guidelines, and each public body is required to have investment policies that are in keeping with those guidelines and meet the needs of that particular public body. 6. If there are limits to the amounts permitted to be invested in such venture, who approves these investments and up to what limit? Is it the executive management of the entity, the board of directors, the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, and or the Cabinet? Response. The limits will be guided by the investment policies of the respective public bodies and the PBMA regulations. Can the Minister state if the government's policies are applicable to the Airports Authority of Jamaica? The Government of Jamaica's investment policy and the PBMA regulations are applicable to all public bodies, inclusive of the Airports Authority of Jamaica. If the answer to Part 7 is in the affirmative, can the Minister state if this policy was followed in relation to the Airports Authority of Jamaica's investment in First Rock Holdings? The PBMA regulations prohibit investment by a public body in a private company if that company is not listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange and if it's without the approval of the Minister of Finance. Prior approval was neither sought nor received for the Airports Authority $1 million investment in First Rock Capital Holdings private placement of February 2019. This would have been contrary to regulations. AAJ's board approved an amendment to AAJ's investment policy in March 2019. It says prior, after the private placements. Yeah, it says prior. It should be March 2019 is after February. After February 2019. In March 2019, AAJ sought the non-objection of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service to the amended policy. The Ministry of Finance provided its non-objection in April 2019, but noted in the correspondence that AAJ should further update the policy to be consistent with the PBMA regulations, which include that the prior approval of the Ministry of Finance is required for investments in unlisted private companies. Given that the investment of $2 million by the AAJ in First Rock Holdings in January of 2020 represented 9.97% of First Rock's total issued share capital and was not a controlling interest, and given that this investment represented less than 5% of AAJ's investment portfolio at the time, this later investment, because there were two, there was a $1 million private placement and then a $2 million in the IPO, this later investment would have been AAJ's amended investment policy, even though that amendment came after the amended investment policy, because it was amended and then this was in January 2020. However, as it applies to the 5% cap on equities, AAJ's investment policy specifies blue chip companies, and it's a matter of judgment as to whether this condition was met. It is also a matter of judgment as to whether it was prudent for a single equity investment to absorb as much of the space allocated to equities in AAJ's investment policy as it did, especially if that investment is an IPO of a company that was in operations for only 2 years at the time. Question 9, can the Minister indicate whether AAJ is seeking to dispose of its investment in First Rock Capital Holdings? Response, it is the Ministry's understanding that the AAJ Group is seeking to do so, even though it doesn't intend to have any kind of fire sale, and therefore the idea is not necessarily to say when and how it will do that. But the answer to that question is yes, it is looking at disposing of its shareholding. If the answer to part 9 is in the affirmative, can the Minister confirm that the disposal will be consistent with the government's divestment policy? The government's divestment policy relates to assets owned by central government. The Airports Authority is expected to be guided by the PBMA regulations in disposing of the shares. Can the Minister of Finance state whether there are other public bodies that have made investments in private companies? Response is yes. If the answer to part 11 is in the affirmative, can the Minister state the amount that these public bodies have invested and the companies that have been the recipients of the investment? And there is an appendix to the question that has a list of public bodies as at, I believe, May of 2021, who have investments in private companies. And they include the Airports Authority, which has been the subject of the questions, the Coconut Industry Board, the National Export-Import Bank of Jamaica. The National Insurance Fund is not a public body, and so should be excluded from this conversation entirely. Their mandate is to seek investments that can generate a return, including investments in equities. Other public bodies, the Development Bank of Jamaica, the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Commission, and NROC. And the specific investments that these public bodies hold are listed in the appendix. It is not practical to read them, but it's not, it's not that many in terms of number. Each of them probably has one, or each of them named has one or two. So out of 140 public bodies that the Ministry has reviewed, as at May, only the Airports Authority, Coconut Industry Board, National Export-Import Bank, Development Bank of Jamaica, Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Commission, and NROC have investment in private companies. Most of these are public shares, and where they are not, it's in keeping with the mandate of the public body, such as the National Export-Import Bank and the Development Bank, who have those particular mandates. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. In answering question 8, you said prior approval was neither sought nor received for the Airport Authority's $1 million investment in First Rock's private placement of February 2019. This would have been contrary to regulations. What action does the Ministry of Finance plan to take with respect to AAJ for what you have acknowledged to be a clear breach of their own regulations and guidelines as it relates to these investments? Secondly, you also said it's a matter of judgment as to whether it was prudent for them to make such a large investment. Yes, it would have fallen below the 10% of a controlling interest, but they ended up being the third largest shareholder in a company, as you have acknowledged, has been in operation for just over 2 years and in an IPO, which I think by any of our accounts, you would expect a government entity to be more conservative in its approach. What action does the Ministry of Finance and the government intend to take, not just related to AAJ, but to ensure that other public bodies don't engage in similar risky type investments, while acknowledging that the investment climate has changed and fixed deposits interest rates are so low? What are the guidelines beyond the PBMAA that will be put in place to protect the public interest here? Clearly there was a breach. I'm not going to raise the conflict of interest issues, which I hope will be investigated by either the Integrity Commission or the Auditor General. But on the face of it here, you have acknowledged a breach, and it is important that we know what steps are going to be taken in this specific case and other steps to prevent other entities from acting in the same way.
Thank you, Member. Just on the, I know you have not mentioned the conflict of interest matter, but I believe there's been erroneous information in the public domain on when but I'll allow that to be corrected elsewhere. With respect to the questions that you asked, the regulation that was breached is a 2017 regulations, a PBMA that says that if a public body is to invest in shares in a private company, that public body needs to have the approval of the Minister of Finance. It may not be a well-known regulation, but it is indeed a regulation that was passed in 2017. One of the measures that we plan to take is to remind all public bodies of this regulation, and in fact to probably send out the full suite of that 2017 regulation along with the 2015 one to all public bodies as a reminder. With respect to measures to be taken, you know, it's in circumstances like this, it's not as easy as it may seem to determine where precisely, you know, who is precisely responsible for the breach. I mean, the entity acts as a corporate entity, and we need further information as to how the decision was made and so forth. But at a minimum, the Public Enterprises Division would be expected to write to the entity and point out the fact that the February 2019 investment breached the regulations, and to ensure that it does not recur at a minimum, I would think. But I think it's premature. We don't have enough information to say exactly. And the regulations themselves, member, and these regulations, we passed in this House, and they build upon regulations before, don't specify don't empower the ministry to take any specific action, beyond a reversal and some kind of reprimand. But there are no specific, like in other regulations and other acts, there's no specific sanctions that are linked to breaches of regulations such as this.
Minister, you have confirmed that the entity is planning to sell these shares. Is there a particular reason that the entity is doing so? Is it as a result of the matter becoming a public matter that they have chosen to, given that this investment was made maybe a year or 2 years ago, and normally you would probably want to hold to see whether you would gain on the investment? What is the rationale for the impending sale of the shares?
Okay, at least one rationale is that at the time it made the investment, AAJ was sitting on a much larger investment portfolio, and the 5% limit for equities would have been a larger amount. COVID happened, the fees going into Airports Authority have dramatically reduced, and that investment balance that they once had 2 years ago when this investment was made has been substantially reduced. And as a result, the percentage of their investment portfolio that this investment represents is in excess of what their policy specifies. So one reason is to get within that policy limit. It's like trimming the portfolio to be within the policy limit. But also what I have put on the table, that it's a matter of judgment as to whether or not a single investment should take up so much of the space to be allocated to equities. And I choose my words carefully, matter of judgment. We operate under a decentralized system in our liberal democracy where we're different, many participants in the public bureaucracy, each of whom has a specific responsibility, and it is the responsibility of the board to exercise good judgment. And one would need a lot more information to be precise on whether that was the case or not, but I at least acknowledge that is a matter of judgment as to whether one should devote so much of the available space to a single investment. So those were the two reasons why they'd be seeking to trim the value of that investment, to come into line with the investment policy guidelines, but also for purposes of diversification, not to be so heavily concentrated in one equity security. And it reflects an exercise of it shouldn't be considered too late to have better and good judgment. And under the circumstances, I think it is to be, rather than to dig in their position, and they're exercising good judgment to recognize that under this, this is the appropriate thing to do at this point in time. And even as we acknowledge that the private placement was a breach of Regulation 23.3, and the later public investment is a matter of judgment as to the size of it in relation to the size of the portfolio of the AAJ.
Minister, the board of the AAJ is appointed by the cabinet. While you may not be the specific portfolio minister with responsibility for that entity, do you continue to have confidence in this board? Having breached its own regulations, you said it's a matter of judgment whether this was a prudent investment, and I think that can be interpreted in many ways. I would say it wasn't. But do you continue to have confidence in this board to properly manage the funds that are under their supervision? But the board, he doesn't appoint it, but the cabinet does, which all of you are a part of. So I acknowledge you are not the portfolio minister. But in a case where a board breaches its own regulations, and the question of investing so much to become the third largest shareholder in an entity, the conflict of interest issues, which I said I'm not going to deal with here, but which may be explored elsewhere. Does the government continue to have confidence in this board?
Just since you mentioned the conflict, it has been brought to my attention that the report in the national newspaper is incorrect factually incorrect in relation to the period of time that the board member of the AAJ served on the board of First Rock. That's a fact that can be proven, and we don't debate facts, but it has been represented to me as an indisputable fact that at the time the investments were made in First Rock, that individual was not on the board of First Rock. That is what has been represented to me, and again, it's something that can be proven. So we shouldn't ask not to perpetuate an inaccurate news story if indeed that is the case. But as you said, we're not talking about that issue here. Member, you have been in government, and you know that we operate in the Westminster system. Ministers have specific responsibilities. Those responsibilities include subject areas and public bodies that come under their purview. I am responding to these questions because I am Minister of the Finance and the Public Service. But when it comes to the policy matters concerning the Ministry of Mining and Transport, the question that you pose is really a question for the minister. Yeah, it's really a question for the minister. It's not a question. It's not a question for me to answer. All right? Not a question for me to answer. Yes. But you know, it's not a question for me to answer.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained.
Madam Speaker, are we at public business? Could I just ask for the recommittal of items 1 and 2? That is the Appellate Jurisdiction, Judicature Appellate Jurisdiction Act, and also the Judicature Parish Courts Act. And having asked for recommittal, ask that we refer the matter back to committee, Madam Speaker. So we're asking for the recommittal and then for the matter to be referred back to committee. No, it's finished.
Minister, at the item presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained, the bill entitled the National Identification and Registration Act 2021.
Madam Speaker, I did that yesterday. We're not debating it today, Madam Speaker. I did it yesterday and to say at the next sitting, but it won't be debated until next term.
So we're now at public business then?
That is correct, Madam Speaker. We are at public business.
Okay.
So I'm asking for the recommittal of item 1 and 2 on government business, and having asked for the recommittal, ask that the matters be referred to committee.
Members, the question is that the item 1 and 2, the Judicature Appellate Jurisdiction Amendment Act 2021 and the Judicature Parish Court Amendment Act 2021 be recommitted. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, members will recall that last week we had some concern in regards to we basically had completed the Into committee, yes.
Committee of the whole House before that.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, we had suspended the discussion at the committee stage so that we could clarify a section that had read, there has not been a lapse of time greater than 12 months after the date of decision that is the subject of the appeal, or any other factor that would make it contrary to the interest of justice to permit the appeal to be made by the prosecutor. Madam Speaker, having had full discussion with the CPC, we have clarified this matter by adding to what we had there a clause 9. And subclause 9, to be exact, Madam Speaker, in clause 2, we're going to add a subclause 9, where it would read 9, where under this section, an application for leave to appeal is granted, the court shall hear the appeal within 12 months after the date on which the application was made. B, an appeal is brought in any case where leave to appeal is not required. The court shall hear the appeal within 12 months after the date on which the appeal is brought. Or C, on an appeal, the court orders a retrial of the case. The retrial shall commence within 6 months after the date on which the order for retrial is made. So, Madam Speaker, we have added subclause 9 to make it very clear that the appeal must be heard within 12 months, and if a retrial is ordered, then the retrial must be heard within 6 months. So if we, Madam Speaker, would like to add that to both, that change to both the Judicature Appellate Jurisdiction Bill and also to the Judicature Parish Courts Amendment Bill, and if the House approve of this addition, I ask for the adoption of this, the adoption, Madam Speaker, of this amendment to the amendments, and ask for its approval.
Members, the question before the House is that the amendments, which is clause 2, subsection 9, in both the Judicature Appellate Jurisdiction Amendment Act and the Judicature Parish Court Amendment Act 2021 be adopted, and if adopted, the amendment approved. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, if you don't mind, before we return back to the House level, Madam Speaker, to say that this matter of the completion of the appeal, within 12 months did raise some public discussion. I want to make it very clear, Madam Speaker, it is deliberate that if the prosecution or the state cannot get this appeal within 12 months, then the right of appeal disappears. And if they do get it within 12 months, they must complete the rehearing within 6 months. Madam Speaker, Madam Chairman, this is sending a message to the judicature, that is the court system, that we must engage and ensure that not only rights of appeal of the prosecution should be heard within 12 months, but it means that all appeals, Madam Speaker, must be completed within a timely manner. Madam Chairman, at the moment, far too many appeals are going 2-3 years and more. It is a fact, Madam Chairman, that you have about 1,800 appeals now, of which 900 the transcripts are not ready, and many of them are in excess of 3 years. Somehow, Madam Chairman, the justice system, Ministry of Justice, the Chief Justice, and all the various parties will have to ensure that transcripts are properly expedited, appeals are expedited, and this will send a right signal that all these appeals must be heard in a very timely manner. One final word, Madam Chairman, and I'm saying it at committee level. I have had the opportunity over the last few years to read many judgments of the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal. The judges are working extremely hard, but at the same time, with due respect, they need to work smartly. And in all sincerity, Madam Chairman, and to the members of the House, I see far too many judgments of over 100 pages. Over 100 pages. And when you read the judgments, regrettably, they come across like an academic exercise. With due respect to the judges, and I know they will attack me on this, the litigants are interested in results, not with the academic exercise that come out in many of these judgments. And I hope, Madam Chairman, to really urge the judges to reduce the length of their judgments. Far too many are 50 pages, over 100 pages, some of them over 200 pages. And I say, Madam Chairman, we have to urge our judges to really work smartly, get judgments done in 20 pages. Supreme Court of the United States, Supreme Court of England, Supreme Court of Canada, most of these Supreme Courts, Madam Chairman, are rarely do you have a judgment more than 20 pages. And I say we must follow suit. So, Madam Chairman, this amendment, which was proposed by and agreed by members of this House, we hope will send the right signal, and we hope it will assist in ensuring that appeals are heard in a timely manner. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
So, members, are we agreed with the discussions? So, clause 2 as amended in both the Judicature Appellate Jurisdiction Amendment Act 2021 and also clause 2 of the Judicature Parish Court Amendment Act. For both, we're putting the amendment as agreed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? And I put clause 3 on both acts as amended. Those in favor? Aye. And I put the title and the enacting clause. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The question for members is that I do report both bills as having been passed at committee stage, an act to amend the Judicature Appellate Jurisdiction Act, passed with 12 amendments. And
I recall that the Microcredit Act was passed in this House of Representatives on January 19th and in the Senate on January 22nd, both of this year. And today what I'm proposing is that the resolutions that were tabled yesterday to do with the microcredit fees regulations 2021 and the microcredit requirements for grant of license regulations 2021 and the microcredit license form of application rules 2021 be approved. And I'll just go through each of them. Madam Speaker, they are very each of them brief, but it's 3 of them. I'll just take members through each. In order for the Microcredit Act to become effective and for the Bank of Jamaica to start the licensing and supervision of the sector, it is necessary that a suite of regulations and rules be promulgated. These include the passage of 1. The microcredit fees regulations, 2. the microcredit requirements for grant of license regulation, and 3. the microcredit license form of application rules. Madam Speaker, it is critical that these rules and regulations be affirmed by the end of July 2021 based on Jamaica's commitment with the Financial Action Task Force. Based on the interrelated nature of these regulations, Madam Speaker, I request your permission to take them together. So our commitment with the Financial Action Task Force is to have the regime that around the regulation of the microcredit sector to have it operational, not just to pass the law. And to have it operational, these regulations that specify exactly how the microcredit organizations need to engage with the regulator and the information they have to provide needs to be passed. So the first, Madam Speaker, is the Microcredit Fees Regulations 2021. And the provisions are as follows. First, I'll deal with the key terms. Fee base, which means the value of total gross loans held at the end of the financial year, calculated by reference to the values prescribed in the financial reports submitted to the bank at the end of the financial year. And startup, which refers to a business that offers microcredit service, which has been in operation for no longer than a year, either before or after the commencement date. Regulation 3, Madam Speaker, states the license fee payable on the grant of a license to operate a microcredit institution, which is a sum of $10,000 for the first $10 million of the fee base, and an additional $1,000 for each additional $10 million or parts thereof. So, I don't want to get the math wrong, but if you have $100 million of loan outstanding, your fee would be $10,000, and then 9 times 1,000, you'd pay $19,000. So the regulation also makes a provision for a startup where the fee for the grant of a license to operate a microcredit institution will be capped at $10,000, even if the loan value that they carry in those in that first year is more than would normally lead to a $10,000 fee. Regulation 4 states that the annual fee payable on or before each anniversary of the grant of a license shall be the same as in Regulation 3, which shall be the sum equivalent to $10,000 for the first $10 million of the fee and an additional $1,000 for each additional $10 million or part thereof. Regulation 5 states that the fees to be payable for the reinstatement of a license which was suspended pursuant to Section 13.3, 29 or 26 of the microcredit shall be 50% of the license fee specified in Regulation 3. This regulation states the fee for the replacement of a license that is lost, defaced or destroyed shall be 10% of the license fee in Regulation 3. However, such fee shall not be less than $5,000. Regulation 6, Madam Speaker, states that the fee for the replacement of a license that is lost, defaced or destroyed shall be 10% of the licensing fee specified in Regulation 3. However, such fee shall not be less than $5,000. The final regulation in the microcredit fees regulations, Regulation 7, Madam Speaker, states the fee for the change of the registered name of a licensee shall be $5,000. I now move to the second of the 3 set of rules and regulations, which is the microcredit requirements for grant of a license regulations 2021. The provisions in the microcredit requirements for grant of a license regulations 2021 are as follows. Regulation 2, Madam Speaker, defines key terms including applicant, which means a person who makes an application pursuant to Section 10 of the Act, applicant from an overseas jurisdiction, meaning a company which is A, incorporated outside of Jamaica and which engages in the provision of microcredit services outside of Jamaica, and B, regulated by a foreign regulator, and C, desirous of providing microcredit services through the operations of a local branch of the company in Jamaica. Politically exposed person, or PEP, which means an individual specified in Regulation 7A2 and Regulation 6 of the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering Prevention Regulations, and Regulation 6A2 and 6 of the Terrorism Prevention Reporting Entities Regulation. And Madam Speaker, ultimate beneficial owner, which means A, in relation to a body corporate, the individual who ultimately owns or controls the body corporate; B, in relation to an applicant for business, the individual on whose behalf the applicant for business conducts the business or one-off transaction concerned; C, in the case of a trust, settlement or other legal arrangement, the individual who ultimately owns or controls the trust, settlement or other legal arrangement as the case may be. Regulation 3 sets out the requirements for grant of a license. It requires the supervisor, in considering an application for a license, to have regard to the following: A, the validity and sufficiency of the documents submitted in support of the application. B, the transparency of the ownership structure or legal arrangements concerning the applicant and the financial or non-financial group in which the applicant is held. C, the ability of the supervisor to independently verify the identity and of the ultimate beneficial ownership of a license. Of the applicant. D, the ability of the applicant to carry on the microcredit business in accordance with the Act. E, the financial resources of the applicant and the source of those resources. F, the source of wealth and the source of funds of individuals who own 20% or more of the applicant. G, the business history of the applicant and, where applicable, the professional history of the proposed officers. H, whether every substantial shareholder and officer of the applicant is a fit and proper person. I, the suitability and adequacy of the legal, managerial, and operational structure of the applicant. And J, whether any of the ultimate beneficial owners or officers of the applicant is a PEP. Those are the considerations that will go into the granting of the license by the regulator. Regulation 4 sets out the requirements for grant of a license of an applicant from an overseas jurisdiction, which shall be subject to A, the prior approval or non-objection from the foreign regulator in the respective jurisdiction in which the applicant is incorporated. B, the regulatory requirements in that jurisdiction that relate to 1, the disclosure of financial information, including audited financial statements, financial returns, and credit information. 2, the accounting and audit standards applicable to the applicant. 3, the functions of the directors of the applicant. And 4, the licensing, registration, authorization, and supervision of the applicant. C, the adequacy of the regulatory standards applied by the foreign regulator in the jurisdiction in relation to the applicant, including the powers and willingness of that regulator to share information and cooperate with the supervisor. D, the capacity and authority of the management of the branch operations proposed to be established in Jamaica to address regulatory concerns regarding the operations of the local branch of the applicant. E, the adequacy of the proposed 1, systems of corporate governance and policy arrangements to address the accountability and transparency requirements of the board of the applicant. 2, the internal controls of the applicant. 3, risk management systems and policies, including the risks of its services being used to commit or facilitate a financial crime. And F, such other matters and information as the supervisor considers appropriate. Regulation 5, Madam Speaker, speaks to the refusal to grant a license and states that a license shall not be granted to a company having its head office outside of Jamaica unless the company, in relation to the operations of the local branch of the company, establishes a principal office in Jamaica, designates an officer of the company as the authorized agent of the company, and C, designates another officer of the company to act as the alternate authorized agent, where the authorized agent designated under paragraph B is absent or otherwise unable to act as the agent of the company. Madam Speaker, I now move to the final set of rules and regulations. The Microcredit License Form of Application Rules 2021. The Microcredit License Form of Application Rules. The provisions in these rules are as follows. Madam Speaker, Rule 2 defines key terms, including applicant, which means a person who makes an application pursuant to Section 10 of the Act. Political exposed person, or PEP, means an individual specified in Regulation 7A2 and 6 of the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering Regulations, and Regulation 6A2 and 6 of the Terrorism Prevention Reporting Entities Regulation. Ultimate beneficial owner means, in relation to a body corporate, the individual who ultimately owns or controls the body corporate. B, in relation to an applicant for business, the individual on whose behalf the applicant for business conducts the business or one-off transaction concerned. And C, in the case of a trust, settlement or other legal arrangement, the individual who ultimately owns or controls the trust, settlement or other legal arrangement, as the case may be. Rule 3 stipulates the form of application to operate a microcredit institution, which shall A, be in the form set out in the schedule, B, be accompanied by the information requested and documents specified in the schedule, C, satisfy the requirements specified in Section 10 of the Act, and D, contain any additional information required for the assessment of the application. Rule 4, Madam Speaker, speaks to incomplete application and states that an application to operate a microcredit institution shall not be considered, A, if the application is incomplete, B, unless the required documents and any additional information that is needed for consideration of the application is submitted by the applicant, C, if the application contains or is supported by information that is false or materially misleading. Rule F also states that an application to operate a microcredit institution shall be considered incomplete if A, the application does not satisfy Rule 3A, or B, the supervisor determines that the application is otherwise insufficient to allow for a consideration of the application. This rule also provides that where, in the opinion of the supervisor, an application is incomplete, the supervisor may, in writing, require the applicant of a specified date to A, submit the completed application, or B, provide the additional information and documents required for consideration of the application. Madam Speaker, Rule 4 also provides that where a request for information is made by the supervisor and the information requested is not received by the date specified by the supervisor, the assessment of the application may be discontinued and the supervisor shall inform the applicant in writing of the discontinuation. Schedule to Rule 3, application for a license to operate a microcredit institution. Madam Speaker, the schedule details the key information to be provided by the applicant, including background information, ownership and group structures, governance structure and arrangements, risk management and internal controls, financial strength, financial resources, and attachments as follows. The background information required for both local and foreign applicants, Madam Speaker, includes name, registered office, the address of the registered office, tax registration number, the incorporation information, information on audit firm and banker, authorized agent in Jamaica, and alternate as the case may be. The information required to be provided on the ownership and group structure of the applicant includes the principal business activities of the applicant's holding company, including details of the amount and value of the shareholding of the holding company, the chart of the group structure, which outlines the relationships among all the connected persons within the group of which the applicant is a part, the list of the branches where microcredit services are offered or to be offered, name of the stock exchange on which the holding company or subsidiary is listed if applicable, details of person who will, whether alone or jointly, possess or control 10% or more of the shares or voting power of the applicant, including number, type, class, and value of shares held. Audited financial statements for the past 3 years for the holding company of the applicant. Alternatively, copies of the financial statements for the last 3 years or less if the holding company of the applicant is a small company and qualifies for the approach reflected at Section 35(2) of the Act. The natural persons who are a politically exposed person and the ultimate beneficial owners of the applicant. Governance structures and arrangements, risk management and internal controls. Madam Speaker, the information required to be provided on the governance structure and arrangements, risk management and internal controls of the applicant includes the name, address, nationality, occupation and proposed or existing responsibilities of each officer of the applicant and, where applicable, of its holding company. Details of the personal and business history of each person to be appointed or who now operates as a director, secretary or other officer of the applicant. Details of the system and arrangements that are in place to be put in place, including the organizational structure and reporting lines proposed. Details of the proposed internal audit function or mechanism that is in place or which is to be established by the applicant. The information required to be provided on financial strength includes copies of audited financial statements, balance sheet, profit and loss, auditor's report and notes for the last 3 years or less where applicable, or copies of the financial statements so prepared for the last 3 years or less for persons who qualify for the approach reflected at Section 35(2) of the Act, and in-house financials for the current operating period. The information required to be provided on financial resources includes details regarding the nature and source of wealth of the applicant, details regarding the source of funds that will be provided or have been provided to support the startup and ongoing operations of the proposed lending activities or of the existing lending activities. Madam Speaker, the main attachments to be submitted with the application include incorporation documents, financial statements, sample of loan agreements and contracts, letter of good standing from the Company's Office of Jamaica, tax compliance certificate, and key policies and procedures on credit and lending, appointment of officers, and customer complaints resolution. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, As this Honourable House knows, microcredit institutions play an important role in facilitating the provision of credit to individuals and micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. As such, in order to improve the monitoring of the industry, promote greater transparency, protect consumers and reduce risks of the industry being used as a vehicle to facilitate money laundering, it is critical that the Act becomes effective and operational. In order for the commencement of the oversight of the microcredit institutions, it is necessary that this suite of regulations and rules be affirmed in the Houses of Parliament. I hereby request, Madam Speaker, that the Honourable House affirms these regulations and rules. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, the opposition doesn't have any major issue with the regulations. Just a question, Minister, on the requirements for the grant of a license on section 3J, whether any of the ultimate beneficial owners or officers of the applicant is a PEP. Is that just for reporting requirements, or is that going to be a hurdle? And I raise it because all of us who serve here, plus our relatives, would be considered as such, and it shouldn't be an obstacle if somebody owns 1%, 2% of a company that intends to be in this business.
Indeed, remember that we are an endangered species, it seems, and we're accepting. The idea here is disclosure. Right? So the regulatory authorities just need to know who the PEPs are, and yes, the PEP extends to family members and so on, so it really becomes a challenge. But the idea is disclosure, so the authorities are aware and they can do what is necessary to ensure that there are systems in place that prevent any kind of abuse or so forth. But that's the purpose of it, and it's the standard around the world, unfortunately, and one that we have to comply with. So, Madam Speaker, I ask again that the rules and regulations be affirmed.
Members, the question is that the rules and regulations be now approved. That is the microcredit fees regulations 2021 resolution, the microcredit license form application resolution 2021, the resolution and microcredit requirements for grant of license regulations 2021 resolution be now approved. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, at this time, our last item under public business is private member's motion number 7, standing in the name of Mr. Hilton.
Madam Speaker, in the interest, I think, of something meaningful arising from this entire incident that has occurred several months ago. There has been discussion, I think meaningful discussion has been taking place. I believe that in the interest of moving forward and to getting something constructive done, it is the intention to, on this last day of before the summer break, that we continue those discussions and resume the discussion, the motion in September when we return.
And that is supported.
So, Madam Speaker, if I understand clearly, we will resume our discussion on this matter when we return to Parliament. So, okay. Thank you, Leader of Government, Leader of Opposition Business. Thank you so much, Mr. Hilton. So, Madam Speaker, today is the last sitting before we take our recess, and I would just like to inform members of the Honourable House that it is not intended for us to meet until probably early in the month of September. This is so as we proceed on our usual summer break. For members of Parliament, though, we really don't get a break, but Parliament is now going on a summer break. However, if needs be, we will be asked to return earlier. As you all know, the work that we as parliamentarians are engaging in this House is never ending. I do hope that you take some time to refuel and rest a bit, MPs. The Emancipation and Independence celebrations are around the corner. Most of our activities will be virtual. And we should take some time to celebrate, even at home with our family, all within the confines of the COVID-19 protocols. So all that's left for me to do is to ask you all to enjoy yourselves and be safe. Madam Speaker, thank you for the way you have conducted Parliament during this period. You really deserve a break at this time. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to join the Leader of Government Business in wishing members a break from Parliament, not a break from the work, because we shift focus from the Parliament elsewhere. Also, in considering the times in which we are, I'd certainly want to enjoin members to be safe, to have a safe period. The festivities are on, and the Minister has indicated that they are virtual. That should minimize the risks. But I do wish for everyone that we have a peaceful, a safe summer break, and that we return energized and ready to proceed with the work of the Parliament. Thank you.
I too want to use this opportunity to thank the members of staff of Parliament, all of us who have worked, the orderlies, the clerk, all the people who have worked with us to make this successful, our Hansard writers, every single person. Because I always say, in any large machine that you see out there working, if there's one little seal that you can't see way inside, that is missing or not functioning, that wonderful bit of machine can do no work. So we want to recognize and thank the staff of Parliament for their hard work, their commitment to it. And I know, without saying too much, that I am trusting that they will feel our appreciation of their commitment to the work they do to make Parliament function as we do. And I want to thank House leaders, both of government and of the opposition, for their cooperation. And I especially commend the Leader of Opposition Business, who has reached out and been cooperative in all matters that we have. And I thank him very much. And I just want to say that it is important that we, both sides, we have different views. But if we are to function for the good of this country, there has to be a meeting of the minds. And I really want to congratulate both sides, and in particular the Leader of Opposition Business, who has held his own, done what he has to do, but he has reached across to enable us as a Parliament to function for the good of this country. And it is commendable, and I thank you very much. I thank you very much, and I want to wish for all. I want to wish for all members of Parliament a good break and on a note that is sad, indeed sad, as we celebrate the independence. I send my sympathies out to the Minister of Finance and to the family of his security detail who will pay their last respects tomorrow. In the midst, you know, they say it is the best of times, the worst of times. Life is a balance of opposites. In the middle of celebration, we have a sad moment. And I really want, on the behalf with COVID and all the restrictions and his family and what it is, many of us who would like to be there will not. But I know our hearts are with them. And we ask God to be with their his family and the minister, because he was like a part of his family, and all who mourn his loss at this time. Members, have a safe independence, and we'll all come back revived and renewed to continue the work. As the leader of government business said, hopefully there'll be no eventualities and we can enjoy the month of August, but if we're called upon to do, they say where duty calls, we must obey. So have a wonderful break from the sittings of Parliament, and remember that our constituents are waiting for us out there, notwithstanding that. This House is now adjourned until a date to be fixed in September, hopefully. House is now adjourned.